This lecture today is endowed in memory of Jacques Bourgonnier. Dr. Bourgonnier was the chief of the Division of Nephrology from soon after he came to the University of Miami in the mid-1970s for more than 20 years, which is remarkable, actually, to be a division chief for more than 20 years. And during that time, he laid the foundation for the division and established a strong program in research programs, emphasized that, and also built the clinical programs in the division to allow the division to become what it has become, which is a very strong clinical and research section in the Department of Medicine. In addition to those things, and probably for me, most importantly, Dr. Bourgonnier was a real gentleman who treated everyone in his division and everyone he knew with a lot of respect and kindness. And he really established that culture within the Division of Nephrology, which still continues. After his passing, a group of friends, colleagues, and family members established this endowment so that we can have this lectureship every year and bring in a thought leader from around the country and the world to give this lecture. And I'm sure Jacques would be thrilled with the speaker we have today, and I'll allow him to be introduced at this time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Taimur. I'm one of the Jackson Internal Medicine Chiefs, and it's my honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Roy-Chaudhury. Dr. Roy-Chaudhury is a professor of medicine and the co-director of the University of North Carolina Kidney Center. His research work emphasizes understanding the pathobiology of dialysis access stents and advancing therapies for chronic kidney disease and end-stage kidney disease. Dr. Roy-Chaudhury and his team have led national research efforts and contributed to groundbreaking studies funded by major institutions such as the VA and NIH. He has also held significant leadership roles in nephrology societies such as the American Society of Nephrology and the International Society of Nephrology as well. He was also the founding co-chair of the Kidney Health Initiative, a public-private partnership aimed at advancing kidney-related treatments. Currently, Dr. Roy-Chaudhury is the president of the American Society of Nephrology and is a member of the FDA's Cardiorenal Drugs Advisory Committee. He is also the founder and chief scientific officer of Innovasc LLC, which is developing a smart magnesium-based biodegradable stent for preventing AVF maturation failure. It's my honor to introduce him. Please welcome Dr. Roy-Chaudhury.
Wonderful. Can all of you hear me? You all hear me now? Oh, pretty much. All right. So thank you, Taimur, for that introduction. And I really wanted to start off, let me just move ahead, by saying that it's really an honor and a privilege to be giving the Dr. Bourgonnier endowed lecture. And I was able to look up a little bit more. I always knew I came to this country in 1993, and I always knew who he was, and I knew about the work that he'd done in HIV-associated nephropathy, but I hadn't really looked into his research output. And one of the things that came out when I looked into the research he did was the breadth of topics that he actually addressed, going all the way from uremia and hyperfiltration to obviously HIV-associated nephropathy. And through the course of the presentation and also in my lecture tomorrow, I'm going to put in little bits of papers that he actually published that link up with some of the things that I'm interested in. The second thing that I found really interesting about him was that, very similar to me, he lived and worked and trained in 3 countries on 3 different continents. So for him, it was Belgium, the Congo, and the United States. And for me, my story actually has taken me from India to Scotland to the United States. And I just felt very happy when I realized that about him. So again, thank you very much for this invitation. I also want to recognize another person. All of you know Alicia. I think in the kidney world, she's known as a powerhouse for drug discovery, for innovative training programs, and particularly important for me, I'm just so delighted that you are an ASN counselor, and I think you've already brought, I think, a lot of neat ideas and a new way of thinking at times to ASN Council. So we're very appreciative of that. All right, so what am I going to speak about? My standard talks are on dialysis vascular access. It's also one of the reasons why you got this talk so late, because I was thinking I really need to speak about something else. So what I'm going to speak about today is about curing kidney disease. I'm going to describe to all of you the innovation, the change, the excitement, and really the hope that is transforming the traditional fabric of kidney care in the US and across the world. I'm going to give you examples from the chronic kidney disease world, from the transplant world, from the hemodialysis world. But then more importantly, I'm going to weave through this fabric of innovation and change, and I'm going to repeat that word hope, because that's a really important word, particularly for our patients. I'm going to weave a very strong thread of other things: education, awareness, equity, access to care, and policy. And as I grow older and older, I am more and more convinced that it is the second group of things that are the really important things if you want to create change. Now, is this curing kidney disease, right? Earlier, we just used to put people onto dialysis. Is this ambitious? Yes. Is it audacious? Yes. Is it possible? I'm going to ask you at the end of my presentation. I think it is. And I also want to say that we really have to do it for kidney patients, for patients on dialysis, for patients with chronic kidney disease, because their life is not really a great life, right? All of you have looked after patients with kidney disease. And so that's perhaps the most important reason why we really need to create change. So let's talk a little bit more about chronic kidney disease initially, right? Many of you would have heard of these numbers. It's a big problem. 850 million people worldwide, 37 million Americans. It's the 8th leading cause of death in the United States. And even though it's the 8 of 10 people with early or even moderate chronic kidney disease don't actually know they have it. And what's even more surprising and important is that many times their physicians don't know that they have a degree of chronic kidney disease. And it's expensive, right? This country spends $130 billion looking after patients with kidney disease, of which $50 billion is spent on looking after patients with end-stage kidney disease. So patients on peritoneal dialysis, hemodialysis, or with a functioning transplant. I think most of you would be familiar with the causes of chronic kidney disease. It's diabetes, it's hypertension, it's glomerulonephritis. 2 additional points about common kidney disease. The final common pathway in many cases is interstitial fibrosis and tubular atrophy, which means that if you can target that, you're probably onto a good thing. And then the second really important point, fifth, I guess, that I want to make is that this is a global problem that is growing. And to prove that, I've just pulled out some data from the Institute of Health Metrics in Seattle on the left side. And the left part of the slide basically tells you that 20 years ago, chronic kidney disease was the 18th most important cause of death. It's now the 9th most important cause of death. In this country, it's expected to be the 5th most important cause of death by the year 2030. Now, when you have kidney disease, a very important correlate is that there is this huge increase in cardiovascular risk. And that's been known really for over 20 years now. The top right panel shows that as your GFR goes down, your cardiovascular risk increases. And what that means, of course, is that all of this comes together into the quality of life of the dialysis patients that you see. They're tired, they're washed out, they have multiple medical morbidities, they have a mortality rate on dialysis, and we'll come to that in a moment, of 18 to 20% in the first year, and they use a huge number of resources. So lots of things that we need to try and correct. Now, I want to focus a little bit on that 20 years. Things have actually deteriorated in terms of the morbidity, the mortality in certain populations, and definitely the economic cost associated with chronic kidney disease. And I mentioned 20 years because this is where the story of kidney disease and my own story sort of come together. So in 1993, so actually it's 30 years. All right. So I was a fellow at the Beth Israel Hospital, and I remember reading a New England Journal of Medicine paper by Ed Lewis, which said that now you, Prabir, as a nephrologist, you have your treatment that you can call your own, and that was captopril, ACE inhibitors. And you can see the data on the right, that significant difference in the placebo group and the captopril group in terms of the people who had a doubling of their baseline creatinine. And as a young fellow, I thought, this is great. They're going to be drug number 2, drug number 3, drug number 4, and this is a great specialty that I'm in. But for 25 years, there was nothing, right? There were angiotensin receptor blockers that came out about in the year 2000. But other than that, it was a 25-year drought, right? And then in 2019, I was at the World Congress of Nephrology in Melbourne, and the data on SGLT2 inhibitors preventing the progression of kidney disease and preventing cardiac events in kidney patients came out. And the kidney world really changed. And from 2019, there's been this flood of new therapies that I'm going to speak about that makes me that much more excited and hopeful that we actually will be able to make kidney care and kidney disease like oncology in some ways. Lots of different therapies, and maybe we could actually cure kidney disease. We never thought about curing kidney disease. We should have. And I want to recognize my mentor, Ron Falk, for being the first person who said in 2012 at his ASN President's Address that we need to cure kidney disease. We didn't have the tools at that time, but I think we may have the tools now. And I really believe, and you're going to be tired of me saying this, that this is, if you're a young physician, this is an incredibly exciting time to come into nephrology, sort of like it used to be. I'm looking at David Roth for your institutional memory, but like it was, I'm told, in the early days of dialysis, right? All these people were dying, and now suddenly with dialysis, you could save them, right? I think we could make a huge impact. But what I do want to say also, and I'm looking at Alicia because she's at ASN and she's a nephrology leader. We are at an inflection point, right? And we have to grasp this moment in time, because if we don't, things change very quickly. Industry is fickle. We don't want to go back to another 25 years of a therapeutic drought, because I don't think that's just not right for our patients. And then I have, again, Dr. Bourgoinet's picture over here, because many years ago, so the captopril study was really the study about you have hyperfiltration. In other words, if you lose some nephrons, other nephrons overwork. And this is a paper that he wrote on the magnification phenomenon that I didn't really know about, which is basically the same thing, that tubules overwork and they potentially could run into problems. So again, I think he was really very much ahead of his times. So let's talk about a little bit more about these new drugs that I keep mentioning. What are these drugs? And when you talk about new therapies, mechanisms are actually very important. And a continuing theme through my presentation is that science is important, but people are more important, right? I totally believe that. George Bacris was a colleague and a friend. He was an amazing teacher. He was a larger-than-life personality. He truly was. He passed away as a result of thyroid cancer, but he, I think, single-handedly has played such an important role in me even being able to talk about the fact that maybe we could actually cure kidney disease. George had this incredible talent of taking a large amount of information and making it simple. And I love that. So for mechanisms for diabetic kidney disease, he said 3 things are important. Metabolic dysregulation, which is all the downstream stuff that happens when you have a high glucose, inflammation that is driven by macrophages, and hemodynamic changes. Now, this sort of construct is really important when you're thinking of new therapies, because you want your new therapies to be able to target one or more of these different pathways. And the 4 new drugs that I'm going to speak about, well, 3 new drugs. So ACE-ARB is always there, but George created this sort of construct, which I find fascinating, where he said that pillar 1 are ACEs and ARBs, and they act on hemodynamic issues. And then pillar 2, and we'll show you the data on this in a moment, would be your SGLT2 inhibitors, which act both on hemodynamics and inflammation. Pillar 3 are the mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, so the non-steroidal version. We'll speak again about that, sort of like spironolactone that acts on inflammation. And then finally, the GLP-1s, the 4th pillar, I'll show you all the data, that acts on metabolic dysregulation. So when you look at these 2 slides, you'd think, well, we worked out the mechanisms, and then we targeted the mechanisms, and now we've got these new drugs, right? Makes sense. Well, that is not what happened. What happened was plain dumb luck, serendipity. So here's the story, right? Stories are important. So in the year 2007, I used to use a lot of this drug. It was called Avandia, rosiglitazone, right? And it was a new drug for the treatment of diabetes. And after we'd used it extensively in millions of people, Steve Nissen came out with a lot of data which said, well, if you use the drug, you're going to have more cardiovascular events. And that's shown not very clearly in the top right panel. And so after 2007, the FDA started asking for cardiovascular outcome studies for every new anti-diabetic drug. And a few years later, we had this group of drugs called the SGLT2 inhibitors. The FDA asked they had a modest effect on blood sugar lowering. The FDA asked for cardiovascular outcome studies to make sure that people didn't keel over and die when they took SGLT2 inhibitors. Lo and behold, what happened was 30% improvement in cardiovascular outcomes. A lot of us complain about the FDA. I do think actually they're a great organization. We owe the FDA on this one. Not only was there an improvement in the cardiovascular outcomes, but there was also a kidney signal. And when the studies were done, adding SGLT2 inhibitors to ACEs and ARBs in patients with both diabetic kidney disease and non-diabetic kidney disease, 3 large studies, relative risk reductions in a combined kidney or cardio-kidney endpoint of between 30 to 40%. Huge difference, right? The kidney world had never seen anything like this. Finally, 25 plus years after 1993, I had my second drug. But then this stuff never stopped happening because, and Dr. Bourgogne comes up again, but another group of drugs came in, the non-steroidal mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, 2 large studies, one with a cardiac endpoint, which was Figaro, the other with a kidney endpoint, which was the Fidelio study. Dr. Bourgognet's picture comes up because he published on the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone pathways, albeit in a different context, but he was there again, and it was interesting how his research kept coming up. But what these two studies showed, and the best data is probably if you combine these two studies, so that's 14,000 patients, you got a relative risk reduction of 14% for the heart endpoints and almost 30% for the composite kidney endpoint. So now I had my third drug, ACE-ARB, SGLT2 inhibitor, and Finrenone. And in July of this, actually in May of this year at the European Renal Association meeting, data came out on the use of semaglutide, the FLOW study, GLP-1 agonist, very clear data, relative risk reductions again in your heart and your kidney endpoints as shown over here of between 25 and 30%. And just yesterday, actually, the FDA approved Ozempic for use for a kidney indication. And I had my fourth drug, right? But they all came in after 2019. And I think there are going to be others. There are aldosterone synthase inhibitors. There are the endothelin antagonists that are out there. So the kidney world really has changed. But of course, this results in all of these other questions that all of you need to come into nephrology. I'm making a blatant pitch for nephrology here, but need to come into nephrology to try and find the answers to. How should we use these drugs? Should we use them all together and put somebody with diabetic kidney disease and a UACR of 350 on all four of these drugs within a period of a month? So my son is a second-year cardiology fellow. What he tells me is, Papa, when I get a patient that comes in with new onset heart failure, they don't go out unless they're on 7 drugs. I said, what about their blood pressure? He said, as long as they can get out of the hospital, I don't care. Maybe that's the right way. I don't know, right? As nephrologists, we're sort of more cerebral. And so maybe we have to do it one at a time. Maybe there's some patients where you need to put all the patients on all of these drugs. Maybe there are others that are going to have terrible side effects, right? But that's the beauty of having therapies that work, because you can work out how to use them better. And again, I think about oncology and a cure, right? We're sort of moving towards that with a large number of different therapies. So one approach is, and this is in the KDIGO guidelines, use them in a tiered approach. If you've got diabetes, you start off on an SGLT2 inhibitor and an ACE or an ARB, and then you add in your Finrenone, which is your mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, and then your GLP-1. But I think these are going to change because, again, I am going to go back to George Bactris, and he was a very strong advocate of a much more aggressive sort of pillared approach, and my son really likes this approach. He said, just different mechanisms, just get them onto all of the different drugs. I will say, though, that maybe George and my son are correct, because the new therapies do appear to be additive. So if you look at cardiovascular endpoints, you see that. So again, the data is not. This is data that has been collected from other studies, right? This isn't a study that's been done to put people onto 3 drugs versus 2 versus 1. But the data suggests that if you have people on ACE-ARB plus an SGLT2 inhibitor, plus a GLP-1 agonist, plus a non-steroidal MRA, that you actually have better cardiac outcomes, that you actually have better kidney outcomes. And again, I've put that red circle because you've got a relative risk reduction of 58%. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. Yeah, earlier in the old days, we used to get excited if you made your P is equal to 0.05, right? But this is a huge reduction. So again, maybe a cure is possible. The reason I get excited about it, and I am influenced by this long period of nothing happening, is that maybe these drugs are going to prevent people from needing dialysis. Maybe these drugs are going to prevent the morbidity and the mortality and the socioeconomic costs and just the trauma that occurs to the entire family when somebody is on dialysis. It destroys the life, not just of the patient, but of all the people around that. That, I think, could be the biggest benefit of these drugs. And I do want to share with you a new paradigm in a way. It's not new, but I am enthusiastic about it for cardio, kidney, metabolic care, because you don't get kidney failure in isolation, right? The people who get kidney failure often have other comorbidities. They have a high BMI, they have diabetes, they have kidney problems, and they have heart problems, right? And so my dream or vision, and I'm in the George Bacris camp for sure, is to surround this group of people with these 4 drugs. Maybe some people will need 3, maybe some people will need 1. I think that's totally open. But then there's another circle that needs to go around the drugs. Can anyone tell me what that circle should have? There's another set of interventions. Lifestyle. Yeah, I would actually put lifestyle right into the CKM patient, right up front. So, but and I missed that out on this slide. So I would say that the other circle around us has to be about things like quality of the drugs, access to care, equity, and policy. Because, you can have all of these drugs, but can you actually get them to the people who are going to benefit from these drugs? And I think this is the biggest issue that we face. It's an issue that's outside, so I'm going to get onto my hobby horse here. So it's an issue that's outside of medicine, but it's absolutely an issue that all of you need to be involved in, because all of us are citizens, right? We're part of civil society. These are really important issues. And you cannot be a good, I will be strong, you cannot be a good physician if you ignore the issues that are on that outer circle. So let's talk a little bit about equity. So in 1966, right, over 50 years ago, Martin Luther King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and the most inhumane. And I would submit to all of you that inequity in kidney disease is the worst inequity of all. Look at the middle panel. As a nephrologist, one could feel proud that in the year 2020, over 3 million people were dialyzed on this planet. But the real number is the number in orange, which shows that at least 8 million people died because of lack of access to dialysis. And the most important reason for lack of access to dialysis is cost, right? And most of those 8 million, and actually that is in my mind, it's a gross underestimate. Most of 95% of those people would be in low and low middle income countries. So I think we have to do better with these new therapies. And I strongly believe that the maximum impact of these new therapies could actually be in parts of the world where there is limited access to dialysis. One could argue that in parts of the world where there is limited access to dialysis, these medicines are an absolute necessity. If you have access to dialysis, maybe it's a bit of a luxury. That's not really correct, because these medicines will prevent morbidity and mortality and cost and improve quality of life by preventing you from going on to dialysis. But the amazing thing is that I think we actually have the opportunity to do this. Right? A lot of these SGLT2 inhibitors are already generic in Canada. They're going to become generic very, very soon. A lot of the other drugs will become generic in different countries at different times. And, I grew up in India. The cost for hemodialysis currently in India is $6,000, which is about twice the per capita income of an average person in India. The cost of 1 year's treatment with dapagliflozin, yes, it's a lot cheaper than over here, is only $60 a year, right? And so, it actually makes sense even for governments to say, well, let's get people onto these drugs, and the prices will actually keep dropping, because you're going to improve quality of life, you're going to have an economic impact, and you're going to have fewer people getting onto dialysis. I want to emphasize again, breaking down the barriers to implementation, whether it's in low-income countries or high-income countries, is, I think, a huge challenge. And this is a great paper that came out in 2024, and it basically describes all of the different types of barriers that are out there. And this is not just for SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 agonists. This is across the board as new therapies come in. And I'm just going to highlight a few of them. You know, it's really important to have patients that are invested, right? That are empowered. Another big barrier is guideline overload. So if you're a primary care physician, you've got 15 minutes, you've got 10 guidelines, and then you've got the nephrologist saying, well, why haven't you measured a UACR? And then you have the cardiologist saying, well, why haven't you measured LP little a or whatever their latest exciting biomarker is, right? So there should be a better way to do that. Poverty, we spoke about cost. That's not just in low and middle income countries, it's all over the world, right? Chronic diseases drive people into poverty. Care fragmentation, right? All of you are familiar with it. You know, again, having a son as a resident and then as a fellow, as a resident, I said, Akshay, are you going down to, don't you want to go and see your patients in the afternoon and talk to them, get to know them? He says, this don't be ridiculous. I'm running after 10 different people trying to get this person out of the hospital. What world are you living in? And again, there is a lot of care fragmentation. Public awareness is important. And you know, we, in a fee-for-service world, dialysis and transplant become important. Prevention of CKD, not so much. Again, that's something that we need to change. I'm going to just pick up just one issue that I think is the most important. Education and awareness. Education and awareness, right? Again, if you look at people who have chronic kidney disease, 7 to 20% know that they have it. The vast majority don't know that they have it. If you look at the people who have it and then who know that they have this problem, and then you see how many of them are on ACEs, how many have a good blood pressure control, it's really not so good. So how do we fix it? I think patients are very important. Patient organizations are very important. Screening is important. Social media is important. Apps can become important. Point of care testing can become important. Incentivizing education and paying for it is important, but it just comes down to people again, right? We need more kidney champions, right? And that's all of you, quite frankly. Yes, it's famous people like Alonzo Mourning and Selena Gomez, but it's also all of you, right? Again, the kidney world needs a lot of champions. I'm going to just talk very briefly about one other therapy where we have a lot of excitement, right? And there are others within the kidney space. So it's not just chronic kidney disease and diabetic kidney disease. IgA nephropathy is another example where we have a fair amount of knowledge about the different mechanisms. But again, it wasn't really the mechanisms that have resulted in this flood of new therapies for IgA nephropathy. 3 new therapies in the last 2 years, another 6 or 7 new therapies that are in the pipeline. So what resulted in this? And it was regulatory science, 100%. So what do I mean by that? So when you're a big pharma company, and I apologize for getting into the details, but I really think this is important. You're a big pharma company, you've got a small molecule that you know will work to block inflammation. It's going to work in inflammatory bowel disease, it's going to work in rheumatoid arthritis, it's likely to work in IgA nephropathy. You are going to choose to put your $100 million into developing the drug for that condition where you have a well-defined regulatory pathway. And for kidney disease, until about 10 years ago, the clinical trial endpoints were death, dialysis, and doubling of serum creatinine, which meant that if you have a new drug, your clinical trial is going to last for 5 years, not for 6 months, not for 6 weeks, because for rheumatology, they have a patient-reported outcome that can be a clinical trial endpoint. And so what the Kidney Health Initiative, and I'll speak about this in a moment, which is a public-private partnership between the American Society of Nephrology and the FDA did, was that they got together a lot of very, very smart people, including people from the FDA. They looked at all the data and they worked out that if you look at the impact of IgA nephropathy drugs on proteinuria at 9 months, that's a good surrogate endpoint, which means that if your drug reduces proteinuria at 9 months, it's almost certainly going to result in an improvement in death, dialysis, and doubling of serum creatinine. And they allowed companies to do clinical trials, which allowed the companies to get these drugs, if they worked on that surrogate endpoint, onto the market in 9 months. And that's really the biggest reason why you have so many drugs. Now, I know it doesn't sound right that these are all business decisions, but business and medicine are interlinked. And I think that this work group has changed the lives of many, many thousands of people with IgA nephropathy. Now, we still have to, in these initial studies, find out what happens at 2 years and 3 years. But initially, my understanding is that things seem to be going well. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I have to look at, yep, I've got some time left. So that was about chronic kidney disease. Let's talk about hemodialysis. At this moment in time, we provide very poor value in hemodialysis. And my hope is that the next 20 slides will become totally obsolete in the next 10 years. I don't think that will happen, but I think the importance will actually go down. But let's talk about hemodialysis as it is now, right? The poor value in hemodialysis is because we spend a lot of money on providing hemodialysis and we have really poor outcomes. If you start 100 people onto hemodialysis in this country, at the end of 5 years, only 41 will be alive. That is a poorer survival than every form of cancer that's shown on the right, other than things like pancreatic cancer, liver cancers, and some forms of brain cancer. And this is without any consideration at all of quality of life. And how many of you, let's make this more interactive. With a show of hands, how many of you are not surprised that our dialysis patients do so poorly? Because you've looked at, right. So I get some hands up, right. They're ill, they're really ill patients. So the reason, or one of the reasons, is not the only reason, but one of the reasons, because I'm sort of a device guy as well, is that there hasn't really been that much change in dialysis technology over the last 50 years. So on the left, you see a patient dialyzing, 1965 at the Royal Free Hospital. On the right, you see a patient in a more modern time. Yes, there are bells and whistles, more bells and whistles on the right. Yes, there's been more miniaturization, but the basic construct of dialysis has stayed the same. Now, I want you to keep this picture, this set of pictures in your mind's eye as I go to the next slide, which tells you what has happened in 50 years of computing. And any of the phones that all of you have in your hands, and I'm actually really pleased that none of you are looking at your phones, so thank you for that. But any of those phones has more computing power than the big IBM computer on the right. And so the question that came up really was, what are the things that we can do to break the cycle of a lack of innovation resulting in poor quality and outcomes, resulting in a high cost burden? And one of the ways that we, and when I say we, it's the Kidney Health Initiative, and I'll tell you about it a little bit more in a moment, was that we felt that we could break the cycle through patient-centered innovation. So let's talk a little bit more about patient-centered innovation. So patient-centered innovation, and this could be discovery innovation or process of care innovation, is innovation that targets the issues that are important to the patient, not necessarily the issues that are important to the physician, or to the payers, or the regulators, or to industry partners. And the reason that this is so important comes out on this slide. So if you take a group of hemodialysis patients and you ask them, what are the things that are important to you? They will come out with answers that say, I don't want to feel washed out at the end of dialysis. I want to be able to travel. I want to have dialysis-free time. I don't want to sit in the dialysis unit bleeding from my fistula while my grandkid is at home with me for 2 days and I miss spending time with him or her. However, if you speak to the physicians who are looking after these same patients, they're going to come out with very different answers. They're going to come out with things, and all of us do. Survival is important. Prevention of hospitalization is important. That's important for patients as well. And then we're nephrologists, right? We obsess about blood pressure, too high, too low, just right? We obsess about blood pressure. So different things from the things that are important to patients. So how do you fix that? How do you develop new therapies that target the issues that are important to patients? And this is a slide from a colleague at the FDA. And the way to do it is to make sure that you have patient input at every point in the product development cycle, if you will, from initial ideation to clinical trial design, to patient preferences, and really to using patient-reported outcomes as a primary endpoint for your clinical trials. Now, it's really easy to put this sort of slide up and feel good about it, but that doesn't change anything. What does change this, however, is to have organizations or initiatives that target these issues. And I want to speak a little bit about the Kidney Health Initiative because I was honored and privileged to be the initial co-chair, and it really changed my life. It changed my life because it broadened my horizons. It made me a more holistic person. It made me understand, it made me look upon patients in a very different way. But separate from that, it's a public-private partnership between the American Society of Nephrology and the US FDA. It was formed over 10 years ago through a memorandum of understanding between ASN and the FDA, led really by my mentor, Dr. Ron Falk, who was the then FDA ASN president, and Margaret Hamburg, who was the FDA commissioner. We have over 80 member organizations within the Kidney Health Initiative. They're patient organizations, they're health professional organizations, they're industry partners, they're federal agencies, not just the FDA, but NIH and CDC and CMS. And the goal of getting all of these organizations together is to create an innovation substrate, if you will, to facilitate the passage of new therapies into the kidney space. And we wanted to do this by doing projects such that the output of these projects, be they white papers or roadmaps or clinical trial endpoints or workshops, would help to get new therapies into the kidney disease space. And one of the projects that we did, actually, before I go into one of the projects, the most important thing about the Kidney Health Initiative was that right from day one, we had a patient and family partnership council. And you can see a picture from about, this is the 2008 PFPC. And it comprised of all the different kidney patient organizations in the field, right? This is the group that made sure that patients always were front and center in whatever initiatives or projects the Kidney Health Initiative did. And I'm going to come to that in a moment. But I was taught one very, very important thing through the patient involvement. So if you look at this picture, it looks like a pretty healthy group of patients. Well, 2 of them are already dead, right? What the KHI PFPC taught me is that if you're a patient, there is a sense of urgency. And that's why, because half of them are going to be dead in 5 years if you're on dialysis. And that's why I think it is so unfair that there were no therapies for 25 years, right? That, to me, is the biggest tragedy of all. And that's why, as nephrologists, as I hope some of you will go, we really need to try and prevent it. So urgency from a patient perspective is something we don't think that much about, right? But if you're a patient, it's really important. So let's talk about the KHI project that focused on a lack of innovation in dialysis. The way we wanted to fix the problem was to create a roadmap. It's on the web. Just put in KHI Innovative RRT Roadmap. It'll come up for innovative renal replacement therapy. And before I tell you about the roadmap, though, I want to tell you some more stories, right? History is important. Stories are important. So when did dialysis begin? 1944, Second World War, occupied Netherlands under the Germans. Wilhelm Kolff, a genius and just, I think, Just a wonderful, wonderful man. And you'll see why in a moment. Took this rotating drum. He took sausage tubing and wrapped it around the drum, took blood from patients with acute kidney injury, put it through the sausage tubing and rotated that drum in a bathtub, as you can see over here, pretty much in a bathtub, right? That was the dialysis. The picture in the middle at the bottom shows you the BUN, the blood urea trajectory for the first successful patient. So a blood urea of 400 is around a BUN of 200. They got a dialysis, it dropped down. This was acute kidney injury. The kidneys recovered, the patient lived. 2 points on this slide. Number one, if you look really carefully, you see the number 17. 16 other patients Kolf tried this in, they all died. He was persistent, right? Very important message. The second important point, well, I guess this is urban legend. Apparently, this woman got up and said, I'm going to divorce my husband. So it's in a book that he's written, but I don't know whether that's true or not. But 4 countries, that's important. After the war ended, Kolf sent his dialysis machines to Canada, the UK, the US, and Poland. No intellectual property, he just sent it. Can anyone tell me why he chose these 4 countries? World War II history. So, what's that? Yep, they're all, yeah. So absolutely, yeah. So soldiers from these 4 countries liberated the Netherlands, right? There was the Polish there was a Polish contingent that actually was part of it, right? So he sent it out all over the world. Again, I think a great man.
Nothing can work.
Okay, actually, I want to go back. Sorry. So I want to tell you a little bit of history. So that was 1944. The dialysis machines went out to different parts of the world. By the early 60s, there was a way of creating a shunt for dialysis, but who do you dialyze? There were all of these people out there that needed dialysis. So this is a CBS documentary that came out, I think, in 1966, and it really speaks, and again, this is history, to the death panels that were out there to decide who should live and who should die. But again, I think it's very important for everybody in nephrology, actually.
Nothing can work. The heart can't work, the brain can't work, the lungs can't work. Nothing can work effectively unless the kidneys regulate the intricate chemistry of the internal medium of the body.
Prior to 1960, it was not even considered possible to treat patients who would not recover their kidney function. In other words, patients with chronic kidney disease were all doomed to death.
When first invited to serve on the committee, I was very uncomfortable, feeling that I was taking the place of God.
Financially, we couldn't afford it. I supposed that I would just die, but I would trust God and pray that I wouldn't die.
The doctor said that I had approximately 2 months to live.
My strongest feeling is that this kind of a committee should not have to exist.
This is going to cost and run into an awful lot of money, maybe billions of dollars. Where are we going to get the money? That's what some of the taxpayers ask us.
It's bad business in more ways than one to let people die. It's good business in plain dollars and cents to keep productive individuals alive today.
Step number 4, the last step in the screening process. The applicant must be approved by a jury of his peers. These are volunteers, anonymous volunteers, who will give the final yes or no to the applicant based on his medical report, his psychological report, his financial report, and on his record as a member of this community, on his record as a responsible human being. In a word, is he worth saving? For the cold, hard fact of the matter is, there are just so many places available on the kidney machine, and there are more applicants than places. Somebody has got to be left out, and somebody has got to decide who shall live and who shall die.
So, you know, we're incredibly lucky in this country that we don't have to deal with it. But in reality, for most parts of the world, this is still what happens. And that's why these new therapies, in my mind, are so important when you look at it from a global perspective. I'm going to speak a little bit quicker and maybe miss over some slides. So we've come a long way since the 1960s, right? The death panels are gone. Hemodialysis is totally routine. Over 500,000 patients on hemodialysis in the US. And as nephrologist, I've been critical of dialysis, but it's still the only reliable and long-term form of organ replacement therapy. And I tell my son, the cardiologist in training, yeah, he speaks about LVADs and all of this stuff. Yeah, it lasts 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, right? Not 25 years like the dialysis machine. And then I just want to emphasize again that the ability to pay still remains the prime predictor globally of who's going to get kidney therapy. Why am I saying all of this? In dialyzing so many people, we've actually forgotten something really important that Wilhelm Kolff spoke about right at the dawn of dialysis, which is that if the treatment of chronic uremia cannot fully rehabilitate people, then that treatment is adequate. And right now, if you speak to patients, they will tell you, dialysis keeps you alive, but it doesn't allow you to live. And so in the roadmap, we've worked out a technical plan in great detail that goes from enhanced dialysis to wearable dialysis to an implantable kidney to the ability to regenerate a kidney. Lots of technical information. But the most important part of that roadmap, which we start off with, is that whatever comes out of the roadmap, that device has to improve a patient's quality of life. It has to improve the ability of patients to work and travel. It has to allow them increased mobility. It has to liberalize their diet. It has to reduce their hospital admissions. And very, very importantly, it needs to have a reduction in the financial impact. Because again, I'm repeating this. All chronic diseases drive people into poverty, regardless of which country in the world you live in. And I really believe that there isn't a chronic disease, unfortunately, that does it better than kidney disease. The roadmap also focuses a lot on supporting activities like regulation and reimbursement. We spoke about regulation earlier. And again, I just want to emphasize that you can have the best idea, the best biology, the best drug or device, but if you don't have this regulatory pathway, it doesn't get to the patients who are desperately waiting for it. The roadmap, in many ways, if you read it, is a technical roadmap. But if you're a patient on hemodialysis, it is a roadmap to freedom, where these new devices are going to take you from being stuck in a chair to being able to do portable hemodialysis to actually, in the future, getting an implantable kidney. This is a patient called Bill Peckham. He's also passed away, right? It's a bad disease. But this is a picture of him rafting down the Colorado River in the middle of the Grand Canyon. How many people in dialysis can do this? 0.000001%. But why can't we have more people do this? Why can't the dialysis machine of the future be like a cell phone that you strap on to your, maybe I'm just being too optimistic, but you have to dream at times. Am I dreaming? Do we actually have the science? The cartoon says I'm a fiction writer in the grant proposal genre. Maybe that's what you need for your grants. But here's the thing. I think that we actually have the biomaterials and the technology and the wherewithal to actually make this quantum leap in dialysis therapy. Just to give you some examples, this is work that's coming out from Kuliana, which is a small company started up by Jonathan Himmelfarb, who's now at Mount Sinai. It photooxidates urea into nitrogen and carbon dioxide. What that means is you don't have to have this, it can regenerate the dialysate. And on the right is it's just this big, so you could put it into a backpack. There's great stuff on implantable kidneys about the size of your fist that gets connected to your artery and vein and a tube into the bladder, silicon nanomembranes coated with tubular cells, right? It actually allows you to have some clearance. We're working on next generation graphene oxide membranes, right? A membrane which is just as big as the tip of my finger has a surface area of a football field, 2,000 times greater than your standard dialysis membranes. Wow, isn't that great for miniaturization? Kidney organoids are out there, right? This is data which shows that if you put flow over a kidney organoid, they come together. That's pretty good, isn't it? Because that could suggest you could regenerate a kidney. And we've all heard about xenotransplants, right? We couldn't use a pig kidney and put it into a human because humans have preformed antibodies against alpha, gal, and other antigens on pig endothelium. But if you use CRISPR-Cas gene editing technology, you can get rid of these bad antigens. You can get rid of the porcine endogenous retroviruses. The middle slide shows you what, to me, when I started off, was a dream, right? Pig kidneys became black the minute you put. Say that again. Yeah, no worries. So pig kidneys became black as soon as you put them into a human. The third guy, the second person from the right is the first patient in the world who got a xenotransplant. Yes, passed away after 2 months. The data that's out there is that this was a totally cardiac event, not related to the kidney. And then finally, policy, right? Policy is really important. Just to give you an example, you get these new devices, they cost $10,000, right? In a fee-for-service, eat what you kill system where the money comes from different buckets, nobody's going to be that enthusiastic about it, right? But if you have a global payment system, and we're beginning to have these now in the kidney world, and if you, in a global payment system, you have a dialysis device that prevents hospital admissions and prevents heart attacks because you're dialyzing continuously and you're dialyzing better, right? That can be extremely attractive in a global payment system because you save money, and in global payment systems, you can share if you take care of patients for less than the money that you get. Finally, messages for the future. 3 messages really, and none of them actually have anything to do with science. So the first message is that it's really important to involve patients in innovation. You've heard me say this. I just want to repeat it again. It's a video, and it's the best example that I've heard about involving patients and the best message I've heard about how patients want to be involved. Where is what did I do? Do you know? Can somebody help me to? It's a very nice video, so I'd like to, yeah. It played a moment ago. No, back. Yeah, no, it's not that. No. It's an embedded video. That's funny. All right, we're just gonna move on. The video is just about a patient saying how important it is for patients to be involved in product development. Again, the voices of a patient who died. So again, we need to do better. The second message is that, and this comes back to this whole thing that I keep going back to, right? 25 years without a change, right? Now we've got an opportunity. Change comes when you have an innovation substrate, when you have a patient-centered ecosystem. We're trying, a lot of the stuff that I spoke to you about is really all about developing that sort of ecosystem. It needs to be an ecosystem that goes all the way from biology to technology to patient care, from ideation and investment to the identification of druggable and deviceable targets, to clinical trial infrastructure, to the surrogate endpoints we spoke about, and then on to regulation and reimbursement. And then once you have it, you need to surround this innovation ecosystem with what I've called equal measures of equity and access to care. So all the non-discovery things that are so important if you want to create change. And the reason that this is so important is that you have to have an innovation substrate. So right now, or 20 years ago, let's say, our innovation substrate was that we weren't getting that many ideas. So let's say we had 10 seeds or ideas. And when they went onto the soil wasn't fertile enough, soil being the innovation substrate. So you got one product or just one sapling. We need to get to this sort of situation. I think we're halfway there, where you have lots of new ideas. There's lots of excitement and energy and investment and interest in kidney disease. And you have an innovation substrate that allows new companies to come up, that allows the seeds to transform or become saplings, which are products. And then my final message, the first two messages actually, but these are messages about people, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's an African proverb. And I would say that we want to go far in kidney care. We want to be disruptive in our innovation. We're excited about the things that are happening. We want to have good outcomes, not 41% at 5 years. We want equitable access. And to do this, we have to go together. Physicians, scientists, engineers, industry partners, federal agencies, and most importantly, patients. And when I put patients there, and I thought about this slide, I think we want to go fast. I think we want to go far, but there is an urgency. So we have to go fast as well. And then at the end, I just want to say it's always about people. Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So you can talk about all the stuff I spoke about. At the end of the day, you need champions, you need innovators, you need people who are committed to change. And when we're talking about people, I've just been incredibly lucky to have a wonderful group of people that I've been able to work with within ASN, within the FDA, within my own laboratory program. Lots of collaborators. I am so lucky to be able to work with people in biomedical engineering and radiology and mathematics and chemistry and biology and chemical engineering and literature. That's what makes life really fun. So I really think I'm very, very lucky. I'm grateful to my funding. And finally, from the University of North Carolina, thanks to all of you. So I have a question. How many of you think that we can cure kidney disease? Hey, okay. Thank you. All right, you've made my day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roy-Chaudhury, for such an inspiring presentation. We don't have time for questions, but if anybody has any specific questions, feel free to come to the front. Again, we can thank you enough. Thanks.